The world of sports has always thrived on legends. Moments that feel larger than life, contracts that defy logic, and names that echo through time. But every so often, a story appears that doesn't just push the boundaries of belief, it completely erases them. A few short weeks ago, a rumor began to ripple through the internet like a shockwave. Not a minor leak or an unconfirmed headline, but a digital earthquake that shook every corner of the sports world. The claim was as bold as it was unbelievable. The Indiana Fever's general manager had just confirmed a $1 billion endorsement deal. At the heart of this explosive story stood the name everyone's been talking about, Caitlin Clark. The rookie phenom who's not only redefining what it means to be a basketball player but rewriting the very economy of women's sports. And alongside her, a name almost mythical in its power, Michael Jordan, the GOAT himself. Together, they were said to be linked in a deal so colossal, it would shatter every record in sports history. The alleged billion-dollar partnership instantly ignited social media. Headlines screamed in all caps. Comment sections turned into digital battlegrounds. Some called it the dawn of a new era for female athletes. Others dismissed it as clickbait, a story too wild to be true. But regardless of which side you believed, one thing was undeniable. People were talking. And in today's attention economy, conversation is currency. If this story were true, it would not just be the largest deal in the history of women's sports, it would surpass nearly every contract ever signed by male athletes. Imagine it, a single partnership worth more than most NBA careers combined. A number so massive it seemed to mock the idea of financial ceilings entirely. For decades, female athletes fought for visibility, for pay equity, for acknowledgement. And now, the rumor suggested, one of them had just leapt so far ahead that the entire system might have to rebuild itself in her shadow. But like every too good to be true headline, this story came with a question mark the size of the number it claimed. Was it real? Was there any factual foundation beneath the avalanche of hype? Or was this yet another masterclass in digital illusion? A viral mirage engineered to dominate your screen, your feed, and your mind for just long enough to make you click? That's the mystery we're about to untangle. Because behind every viral rumor lies a trail, a sequence of decisions, coincidences, and deliberate manipulations that turn fragments of truth into full-blown legends. And in this case, that trail doesn't just lead to Caitlin Clark's rapidly expanding empire. It leads deep into the heart of how fame, business, and storytelling collide in the age of algorithms. So before we dismiss the billion-dollar story as fantasy, let's pause. Because the truth, the real story, might be even more fascinating than the rumor itself. It started like most modern myths do, quietly, almost innocently. A single post, shared without much context, whispered across social platforms late one evening. It claimed that the Indiana Fever's general manager had silently confirmed a billion-dollar endorsement deal linking Caitlin Clark and Michael Jordan. Within hours, screenshots began to circulate on X, Reddit, and TikTok. The wording was vague, the sources non-existent, but the intrigue? Off the charts. By the next morning, the digital wildfire had spread. Videos dissecting the announcement were everywhere, each adding their own twist. Some creators confidently claimed insider confirmation. Others dramatically displayed fake headlines styled to look like ESPN exclusives. And the more people saw it, the more believable it became. That's the power of modern virality. Repetition breeds reality. The more often a lie is shared, the more comfortable it starts to feel. But this wasn't just any rumor. This was one that hit every emotional nerve possible. It mixed money, gender, legacy, and power. It wasn't only about Caitlin Clark, it was about what she represented. The idea that a woman could sign a deal so monumental it would make even male sports icons look twice. A figure so massive it would shatter decades of inequality in one jaw-dropping move. People wanted it to be true. It wasn't just a rumor, it was a symbol. The timing couldn't have been better, or more dangerous. Caitlin Clark's debut in the WNBA had already become one of the biggest cultural moments in modern sports. Every shot she took, every record she broke, every sold-out arena was headline material. The spotlight on her was already blindingly bright. So when someone dropped the billion-dollar bombshell, the world didn't question it, it amplified it. News aggregators picked up the story, blending speculation with legitimate facts to create what looked like credible reporting. The phrase, according to sources, appeared everywhere, yet no one could actually trace the original source. YouTubers and sports commentators flooded timelines with thumbnails screaming, "Caitlin Clark's $1 billion deal explained," often without any explanation at all. And here's the fascinating part. None of it came from official channels. Not the Indiana Fever. Not Nike. Not even Jordan Brand. The entire storm was built from recycled fragments of truth, interviews, brand links, sponsorship hints, stitched together into a story so explosive that it needed no verification. That's how modern myths are born. One drop of truth in a sea of speculation, and before long, it becomes impossible to tell which is which. Fans, desperate for something groundbreaking, turned the whisper into a movement. And for Caitlin Clark, who was already rewriting the rulebook for women's basketball, the rumor only added to her legend. It's easy to see why. The internet isn't driven by accuracy. It's driven by emotion. And this story had all the right ingredients. An underdog sport, a generational talent, and the most iconic athlete of all time tied together by a number so massive it felt unreal. But the real question wasn't who started it. It was why it worked. Because behind the viral chaos was something far more powerful. Something that made even the wildest claims seem believable. And that force had a name. The Clark effect. Every viral story needs a foundation. Something real enough to anchor the fantasy. And in this case, that foundation wasn't invented by tabloids or content creators. It was built by Caitlin Clark herself. Her arrival in the WNBA wasn't a debut. It was an eruption. The moment her name was called at the draft, the sport changed. Not gradually, not quietly, but instantly. Within hours, her jersey became the top-selling item across the entire Fanatics network, outselling icons from the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. Ticket prices for Indiana Fever games tripled overnight. Teams that had never once sold out their arenas were suddenly scrambling to move games into larger NBA venues just to handle demand. This wasn't hype. It was economic transformation. The kind of change entire marketing departments dream about but rarely see. For years, women's basketball had battled for mainstream recognition. And then, suddenly, there was Caitlin Clark. One player, one story, generating more engagement than the entire league had in decades. Television numbers told the same story. National broadcasts that once struggled for viewership were now shattering records by 200%, sometimes 300%. Sports networks that had long treated women's basketball as an afterthought were now reorienting entire schedules to capitalize on the wave of new viewers. Clips of her deep three-pointers and fiery celebrations flooded social media, drawing millions of views in minutes. Analysts started calling it the Clark effect. A phenomenon that wasn't about statistics or skill alone, but about cultural gravity. She didn't just play basketball, she commanded attention. Her games weren't just sporting events. They were pop culture moments, the kind you couldn't scroll past without stopping. And that's what made the billion-dollar rumor so believable. Because for the first time, a female athlete was generating male-level numbers, and then surpassing them. When people saw empty seats vanish, jerseys sell out, and national broadcasts spike like never before, a billion-dollar valuation didn't seem like fantasy anymore. It started to sound like the next logical step. Caitlin's rise didn't just boost her own brand. It redefined the economics of the WNBA. Suddenly, every player, team, and sponsor was part of a new equation. The Fever weren't just a basketball team anymore. They were a business empire in motion. Executives were openly comparing their ambitions to tech companies like Apple, calling Caitlin the untouchable core of a global sports brand. And that's where the line between fact and fiction began to blur. Because when an athlete starts making this kind of impact, the imagination of fans, and the greed of the internet, start to run wild. People didn't just believe the billion-dollar story because they wanted it to be true. They believed it because Caitlin Clark made it feel possible. Her presence had single-handedly reshaped what people thought a woman in sports could be worth. That's the essence of the Clark effect. It's not just fame. It's not even dominance. It's transformation. The rare, once-in-a-generation moment when talent collides with timing, when one player becomes the spark that forces an entire industry to evolve. And for the rumor that took over the internet, that transformation was the fuel. Because without the Clark effect, no one would have even dared to imagine a billion-dollar headline. But with her, suddenly the unbelievable didn't feel so far-fetched. Now that the myth has our attention, it's time to trace where fantasy meets fact, to follow the trail of money, contracts, and corporate power that turned this whisper into a worldwide story. Every great rumor has a spark of truth buried inside it, a kernel of reality strong enough to make the lie believable. For the billion-dollar Caitlin Clark story, that spark came straight from her real-world contracts. Because while the internet exaggerated the numbers, it didn't invent the foundation. The foundation was very real, and very lucrative. Earlier this year, Caitlin Clark signed one of the most groundbreaking endorsement deals in women's sports history. An 8-year partnership with Nike reportedly worth up to $28 million. That figure alone was enough to shatter records. It became the single largest sponsorship deal ever awarded to a women's basketball player. Not a rumor, not speculation. Cold, verifiable fact. This wasn't some basic nil renewal or a short-term brand alignment. This was Nike making a statement to the world. They weren't just backing a rising star. They were investing in a global phenomenon. They were betting that Caitlin Clark wasn't just a player. She was the face of a new era. And to solidify that, they offered her something that only a handful of athletes on Earth ever receive, her own signature shoe line. To understand how big that is, you have to look at the history. Nike doesn't hand out signature lines casually. You need more than skill, you need cultural weight. LeBron, Kobe, KD, these are athletes who transcend their sport. And now, Caitlin joined that list. That wasn't just a deal, it was a coronation. But the real fuel behind the billion-dollar myth came from one powerful connection: the Jordan brand. Because the Jordan brand, as massive and legendary as it is, exists under the very same corporate roof as Nike. And that's where things started to blur. You see, Michael Jordan isn't just a retired legend or a logo. He's the living CEO of a global empire, one built on legacy, storytelling, and an unshakable sense of exclusivity. His brand, powered and distributed by Nike, generates billions annually. So when Caitlin Clark inked her historic deal, people noticed the corporate overlap. Nike, Jordan, basketball royalty, billion-dollar potential. The math was too tempting to ignore. And that's when content creators pounced. They began weaving together fragments of truth: the $28 million deal, the Jordan connection, the signature shoe, and layering it with speculation. Before long, Caitlin Clark signs $28 million Nike deal, quietly evolved into Caitlin Clark signs billion-dollar Nike-Jordan partnership. The factual seed had grown into a digital myth. Then, as if to pour gasoline on the fire, Caitlin signed another record-breaking deal, this time with Wilson Sporting Goods. The symbolism was undeniable. For the first time since Michael Jordan himself, an athlete would have a personal signature basketball collection with Wilson. That move was deliberate, strategic, and soaked in legacy. It didn't take long for the internet to connect the dots. Nike plus Jordan plus Wilson plus Caitlin Clark equals billion-dollar empire. The pieces were all real. It was just the total that was fiction. But in the world of social media, perception is reality. And the narrative became unstoppable. What made it even more convincing was how everything seemed to line up perfectly. Caitlin Clark, the generational star with explosive market power. Nike, the global sports titan. Jordan, the icon of icons. Wilson, the symbol of basketball itself. The rumor didn't sound like a stretch. It sounded like destiny. But as the story spread, one thing was missing: proof. No press release, no audio confirmation, no legitimate quote from any executive. And yet, the absence of evidence didn't kill the rumor. It amplified it. Because in today's digital landscape, mystery sells faster than truth. That's how we arrived here, standing at the crossroads of fact and fantasy. The deals were real. The numbers were massive. The connections were undeniable. But $1 billion. That was a stretch even the corporate giants weren't ready to claim. And yet, despite that, the internet still believed. Why? Because somewhere deep down, people didn't care whether it was true, they cared that it could be. But as the billion-dollar storm reached its peak, two unexpected names pulled the narrative into chaos. Indiana Fever's GM Lynn Dunn and Clark's fierce on-court ally Sophie Cunningham. Their supposed confirmation would become the tipping point between believable and absurd, the moment where the story stopped being business and became theater. The deeper the rumor spread, the more names it pulled into its orbit. Soon, two people were dragged into the chaos: the Indiana Fever's general manager, Lynn Dunn, and Phoenix Mercury guard Sophie Cunningham. Their supposed involvement was what turned a viral story into a full-blown sensation. It all began with a single, out-of-context quote. During a post-draft press conference, Lynn Dunn praised Caitlin Clark in glowing terms, calling her a once-in-a-generation talent who has transformed the economics of the WNBA overnight. That statement was true, powerful, and deserved. But within days, content aggregators twisted it into something completely different. Headlines began appearing that read, "Fever GM confirms $1 billion deal, Jordan partnership in motion." The leap from admiration to billion-dollar confirmation happened without a shred of actual evidence. The internet didn't need Dunn to say it, it only needed her to say something. That's how misinformation works. The mind fills in the blanks. And when the blanks involve billion-dollar numbers and the greatest basketball player of all time, logic doesn't stand a chance. When journalists traced the claim, they found no team statement, no official announcement, not even a stray social post from the Fever confirming a deal of any kind. What they did find, though, was a pattern. Dunn's legitimate praise for Caitlin's impact, her ability to sell out arenas, skyrocket ratings, and shift an entire league's perception, had been chopped, edited, and repackaged. The praise was real, but the confirmation was fiction. Then came Sophie Cunningham. If Caitlin Clark had become the symbol of a new era in the WNBA, Sophie had become her on-court bodyguard. Fierce, vocal, and unapologetically loyal. From the moment Clark joined the league, she was targeted with hard fouls, aggressive defense, and verbal heat. Sophie wasn't having it. She made headlines for calling out players who disrespected Clark, saying bluntly, "Anyone who doesn't see her as the future of this league is just dumb as F******. That clip went viral in seconds. Her fiery defense of Caitlin turned her into an internet favorite, a warrior guarding the sport's golden child. But in the hands of content creators chasing clicks, that relationship was twisted into something entirely different. Suddenly, Sophie wasn't just Clark's defender. She was portrayed as her business partner. Fake thumbnails and edited voiceovers began claiming, Clark and Cunningham signed billion-dollar joint venture with Jordan Brand. It was the perfect narrative bait. Dramatic, cinematic, and completely untrue. Still, it worked. Because the internet doesn't care about precision, it craves patterns. Two fierce women linked by loyalty? Add Jordan's name, and you've got yourself a viral formula. So here's the reality. Lynn Dunn never confirmed any billion-dollar figure. Sophie Cunningham never entered any partnership. The confirmation was an illusion, a creative remix of genuine quotes, repackaged into something explosive enough to break timelines. It was misinformation at its most advanced form, truth-adjacent storytelling. Yet, even as the facts came out, the belief persisted. Because the world wanted this story to be true. It represented something far bigger than a paycheck. It symbolized a long-overdue revolution in women's sports. It wasn't just about Clark or Jordan anymore. It was about the idea that female athletes could finally command the kind of power, respect, and money that had long been reserved for men. And that's the dangerous beauty of viral myths. They mix enough emotion with enough reality to become nearly indestructible. But the deeper we look, the clearer the pattern becomes. There was no official billion-dollar deal, but there was a billion-dollar strategy. A strategy of storytelling, marketing, and digital engineering so sophisticated it blurred the line between truth and imagination. That's what we uncover next: how the internet manufactures modern myths. By the time the billion-dollar story reached its peak, it had already mutated into a monster that no one could control. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a movement. A prime example of how modern media takes fragments of reality, wraps them in spectacle, and sells them back to the public as truth. At its core, The anatomy of a viral rumor follows a simple but devastatingly effective pattern. Step 1. A seed of truth. In this case, Caitlin Clark's very real, record-shattering Nike contract. A figure so large it already made headlines and changed the landscape of women's basketball. That's all the internet needed. A single credible foundation to build a skyscraper of fiction on top of. Step 2. The legendary connection. Every viral story needs an icon to amplify its reach. Enter Michael Jordan, the most marketable athlete in history, whose very name carries weight across generations. Add Jordan's brand under Nike's corporate umbrella, and suddenly, a $28 million deal sounds like a precursor to something even bigger. The leap from Nike to Jordan is small, but in clickbait terms, it's everything. Step 3. The official veneer. Rumors gain momentum when they appear legitimate. That's where the confirmation by Lynn Dunn came in. One loosely interpreted quote, stripped of context, repurposed into a headline that screamed authenticity. The public didn't question it. They recognized the name, the title, the authority. It looked official, and that was enough. Step 4. The emotional hook. People don't share information, they share feelings. And this story hit emotional pay dirt. A female athlete, finally, breaking the billion-dollar barrier? That wasn't just news, it was justice. It felt historic, inspiring, and empowering. So even if the facts didn't align, the sentiment did. And in the world of social media, emotion beats evidence every single time. Step 5. The algorithmic packaging. This is where creativity turns into manipulation. YouTubers, TikTokers, and sports channels started crafting thumbnails with red arrows, shocked faces, and dramatic text overlays. $1 billion deal confirmed? The visual language of virality took over. Algorithms prioritized engagement over accuracy, pushing the story to millions of feeds. The more people interacted, the more it spread. A perfect feedback loop of outrage, curiosity, and disbelief. And finally, step 6. The echo chamber. Once enough people started believing, the rumor began validating itself. Fans argued online. Commenters quoted fake articles to each other. Smaller media outlets re-reported the claim to avoid missing the traffic. Within days, fiction became folklore. That's the dark art of digital storytelling in the 21st century. It doesn't have to be true, it just has to be believable. The internet rewards what makes you feel something, not what makes sense. And this story made people feel everything. Hope, awe, pride, and even a bit of envy. Yet, buried beneath all that noise was something truly remarkable. The rumor may have been false, but it was built upon a foundation of truth that couldn't be ignored. Because Caitlin Clark was changing the game, financially, culturally, and psychologically. The story's popularity wasn't random. It was a reflection of just how seismic her real-world impact had become. In other words, the rumor wasn't proof of a fake billion-dollar deal, it was proof that people were ready to believe in one. But to understand how big the real story actually is, we have to separate fantasy from fact, and take a closer look at Caitlin Clark's growing empire. Because while the internet chases myths, her actual financial power might be even more shocking than the rumor itself. When the dust of the billion-dollar rumor finally began to settle, what emerged wasn't disappointment, it was awe. Because while that headline might have been fiction, Caitlin Clark's real financial empire is already rewriting the rules of sports economics. The truth doesn't need exaggeration. The numbers themselves are almost unbelievable. Before she ever stepped onto a WNBA court, Clark had already become a global marketing powerhouse. Her name alone could spike ticket prices, double merchandise sales, and crash websites within minutes of an announcement. But it wasn't luck. It was brand architecture, carefully built, brilliantly executed, and powered by raw performance that matched every ounce of the hype. Her portfolio reads like a dream lineup for any athlete. Nike, Wilson, Gatorade, State Farm, and Panini. Each of these partnerships represents a different layer of her empire. Nike gave her prestige and permanence, a global platform that stamped her as an icon. Wilson gave her symbolism, the first signature basketball since Michael Jordan himself. Gatorade added endurance and athletic credibility. State Farm provided family-friendly relatability. Panini, the trading card giant, tapped into nostalgia and collectability, transforming her likeness into an asset that fans could literally hold in their hands. Together, those deals form something far more valuable than a simple paycheck. They build equity. Caitlyn isn't just endorsing brands. She's becoming one. Every campaign, every logo, every photo op adds another layer to what can only be described as Caitlyn Clark Inc. What makes this empire truly groundbreaking is how it completely dwarfs her official WNBA salary. Under the league's collective bargaining agreement, rookies like Clark earn roughly $76,000 a year. It's a respectable number in most professions, but pocket change compared to her endorsement income, which soars into the multi-millions annually. In short, her brand earns more in a single commercial than her contract does in an entire season. That imbalance reveals a deeper truth about modern sports. The court isn't where the biggest money is made anymore. It's the platform. The athlete who can capture global attention isn't just competing in games. They're competing in the marketplace of influence. Caitlyn Clark understood that from day one. Every highlight, every viral clip, every authentic reaction was part of a larger narrative that positioned her not just as a player but as a movement. She's the living proof that women's sports are no longer a niche. They're a billion-dollar industry waiting for investment. And brands have noticed. Executives who once hesitated to pour major marketing budgets into women's basketball are now fighting for a slice of the Caitlyn Clark effect. Her audience isn't just passionate. It's profitable. The data shows it. Higher engagement rates, broader demographics, longer watch times. She's not only changing who watches but how people watch. That's the true scale of her empire. She's collapsing barriers between fandom and commerce, between athletics and entrepreneurship. The Caitlyn Clark model isn't about one record-breaking deal. It's about sustained dominance across every medium that touches culture. Television, merch, social media, streaming, even collectibles. She's everywhere, and every appearance multiplies her value. So when people read the billion-dollar rumor and thought, "That can't be real," they were half right. It wasn't real yet. But in terms of potential, Caitlyn Clark is already operating in that orbit. Every new endorsement, every televised moment, every headline builds towards something that looks less like fantasy and more like inevitability. Because when you strip away the noise, the myth, and the exaggeration, one fact stands unshakable. Caitlyn Clark is a business, one that's expanding faster than anyone predicted. She doesn't need a fake billion-dollar deal to prove her worth. She's already earning something far more valuable: cultural permanence. And if history has taught us anything, it's that empires like hers don't fade quietly, they evolve. Which brings us to the final question. If this is what her career looks like now, what happens a decade from today? The rumor may have been false, but the message behind it was loud and clear. The world is ready for a billion-dollar female athlete, and Caitlyn Clark might be the one to make it happen. What started as an exaggerated headline has quietly evolved into something far more powerful: a forecast of the future. Because when you step back and look at the numbers, the trajectory, and the cultural shift, the writing is already on the wall. Caitlyn isn't merely playing basketball. She's reshaping what's possible for women in professional sports. She's proving that attention is value, that fandom can be monetized, and that equality isn't a plea, it's a product of undeniable performance. In just a few months, she's achieved what entire marketing teams couldn't manufacture in decades: mainstream obsession. Her highlights trend across platforms, her merchandise sells out in hours, and her games have become events that draw celebrities, influencers, and national media coverage. Every move she makes is amplified by a world that can't seem to look away. That's not hype, that's cultural gravity. If you trace the pattern, you can already see the roadmap to a real billion-dollar legacy. It won't come from one contract, one signature shoe, or one endorsement. It'll come from the ecosystem she's building, a network of influence, visibility, and loyalty that compounds year after year. She's tapping into something bigger than sports: storytelling. People aren't just fans of Caitlyn Clark the athlete, they're fans of Caitlyn Clark the idea. And that idea, of a woman who dominates her craft, commands global attention, and refuses to apologize for her success, is exactly what brands crave. It's why companies are rushing to associate their image with hers. It's why young athletes are watching her like she's the blueprint. And it's why analysts are already predicting that within the next decade, her name could sit beside the giants of sports business: LeBron, Serena, Jordan, not as a comparison, but as an equal. But perhaps the most astonishing part of this entire saga is what it says about belief. The billion-dollar rumor didn't spread because it was convincing. It spread because people wanted to believe it. Because deep down, fans and critics alike recognized something revolutionary was happening before their eyes. The kind of seismic shift that forces entire industries to adjust. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the fake deal, not the clickbait, but the awakening of public perception. For decades, women's sports were treated as a side note. Now, a single athlete has turned that narrative inside out. The belief that a female player could sign a billion-dollar deal, no matter how premature, is itself a symbol of progress. So, when we look back on this moment in 10 years, what will we see? Will the billion-dollar number look absurd, or will it look small? Because if Caitlin Clark continues on her current path, it's entirely possible that this rumor will one day read like prophecy. She's not chasing the number. She's building the foundation that will make it real. Every contract she signs, every headline she owns, every kid who grows up wearing her jersey pushes that figure closer to reality. The next generation won't ask whether a woman can reach that level. They'll ask why it took so long. Caitlin Clark has already changed the game. The only question left is how far she'll go before the rest of the world catches up. If you've made it this far, you're part of a growing community that actually cares about stories like this. The kind that pull back the curtain, challenge the norm, and dive into the truth behind the headlines. But to keep uncovering and telling stories that matter, we need your help. Tap that subscribe button. It's free, but it tells YouTube that this kind of content deserves to be seen. Like this video, it helps the algorithm notice us instead of the noise. Drop a comment below. What do you think? Will Caitlin Clark become the first true billion-dollar athlete in women's sports, or will someone else get there first? Your engagement doesn't just help the channel, it helps fuel the kind of storytelling that brings real insight to the headlines everyone's talking about. Because here, we don't just chase rumors. We expose the reality behind them.